Hello, and welcome to the Music Teacher Coffee Talk podcast. I'm Carrie.
And I'm Tanya. We are both elementary music teachers who love to talk shop, preferably over a steaming cup of coffee. This is episode 171. Today we are chatting with Anne Mileski about singing in the elementary music classroom. We'll also talk about our highs and lows from the teaching week, discuss some ideas in our Know Better, Do Better segment, share a work smarter, not harder teacher tip.
And in our CODA section, we'll give some specific recommendations of our favorite things we are enjoying in and out of the music room. So grab your beverage of choice and let's get started.
Anne Mileski is an early childhood and elementary music educator and clinician based in Eastern Washington. She currently serves as an instructor at Eastern West Washington University and instructor and coordinator of elementary and general music at Gonzaga University, where Anne Mileski is an early childhood and elementary music educator and clinician based in Eastern Washington. She currently serves as an instructor at Eastern Washington University, an instructor and coordinator of elementary general music at Gonzaga University, where she teaches method courses and supervises elementary music field experiences and student teachers. She also teaches at Eastern Washington University and St. Mary's Catholic School in Spokane Valley.
As a pedagogy enthusiast, Anne is certified in Orff Schulwerk, Kodai, Smithsonian Folkways, World Music Pedagogy, Music Learning Theory, Elementary General Level 1, and has completed coursework in Dalcroze Eurythmics. She is a regular clinician at local workshops, state music conferences, and has presented at both AOSA and OAK conferences. She has served on the faculty for Kodai teaching education programs at multiple programs throughout the United States.
And also hosts the Anacrusic podcast, where she shares inspiration and ideas for elementary music teachers, as well as co hosts the Teaching Music Tomorrow podcast with Victoria Bowler. When she's not teaching music, Anne enjoys traveling and adventuring with her husband and 3 young children.
So here we are with the fabulous Anne Mileski, and we are so excited to chat with you today. Thanks for being here, Anne.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Feels like it's been a long time coming, so I'm excited.
I
Yeah.
know,
Yes.
worlds colliding. So we are going to jump in with some highs and lows from our teaching week, and we know, Anne, you teach a variety of things. So maybe you tell us what you want to talk about today in your teaching world.
Yeah, so I do teach a couple of days a week at an elementary school. I teach pre-K through sixth grade music, but then when I'm not there, I teach college. And so one of the courses that I'm teaching this quarter and that I taught last quarter is an integrating music into the elementary general music classroom, which is a mouthful. And what that means is people who want to be elementary teachers, like a grade level classroom teacher, have to take this course as a prerequisite to be in the education program. It's a very common course. Most teachers have to take it, right? And so it's all about how to use music as a teaching tool. Well, it's one of the hardest classes I've ever had to teach because we're teaching non-musicians, right? Not quote unquote non-musicians. And so these students maybe have never been asked to sing before, never been asked to move this way before, never been asked to pick up a pair of rhythm sticks, whatever it might be. And last quarter, I felt like I was literally pulling teeth just to get any type of response from the class. Like I would sing a phrase and motion for them to sing back, and it would be crickets. And I'd be like, you have to, you have to just like fake it till you make it, even if you're uncomfortable. You know, teaching is public speaking, it's performance, it's all of those things that if you're going to be in front of a group of kids, you just got to be ready to jump in and do. So anyway, so that was very frustrating last quarter. And then this quarter, I have a larger class, and maybe that's part of it. And we could get into, you know, the psychology behind all of that. But I have a class and everybody is participating just like right out of the gate. You know, the first time I asked them to sing, they were a little apprehensive, but then after I said, "You guys sound great," they just kept, you know, they put a little bit more gusto behind it. And everybody has been really engaged and playing and smiling and laughing and all the things that you would expect from little kids. So that felt really good this week. It's making me feel better about this class that before I was like, oh my gosh, I have to teach this again. So I'm pretty, which is a horrible thing to say, but I was honest to goodness feeling that way. So that was a good little boost this week.
That's
Yay.
awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes you have that class, as we like to call it. We have a whole podcast episode about that class, and
But
it
not
can
as
be
Isn't
that
that
way
grown-ups.
the
with
truth?
adults.
Yeah, but isn't that so funny? I mean, people are people, right? So
Yeah.
it's just like just like you have that class or whatever that mix of kids is in that group in that community, they're going to function differently depending on how they would be in a different community, right? Like you see that when kids switch grade levels. Like in third grade they were great, but now they're with this like grade quote unquote again. Now they're with this like group of kids and it's a little bit more difficult for them to engage in the same way. So I just it's interesting. It's interesting to think about, but I feel very optimistic. Maybe I'll come back on Monday and it won't be the same, but yesterday was great.
It would be
So,
interesting to see what their like growing up experiences are with music. I'm sure that plays into it. Like
mhm.
maybe the group that you had earlier just didn't find themselves being musical because that wasn't what they were trained to do, you know?
Yeah, and I think there is some truth to that, Tanya, because I have them fill out like a about you form when the quarter starts, and there are quite enough, probably like 5 or 6 students out of the 22 that are have a musical background or say I played this instrument all through high school or I sang in choir or I took piano, all the way through whatever. So, um, I do think that definitely plays a part in it for sure. Right.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, Tanya, let's hear your high or low from the teaching week.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm focusing on second grade because we are doing a concert. And after much back and forth about what it was going to be, second grade is studying weather, plus they're doing poetry. So we're doing a Weather the Weather concert, which comes from that poem, which I probably can't memorize, don't have memorized, but whether the weather be good, whether the weather be hot, whether anyway, it's this whole little poem. And so each of my 4 second grade classes has a season, and we will be singing songs of that season, and interspersed we'll do some weather related poems. But I just wanted to give a shout out to my librarian and second grade teachers because unfortunately I am not accustomed to getting any kind of help from grown-ups in the building. At my last school it was just, I mean, I probably should have established more of that, but it was just kind of like, I'm in charge of the concert, I'm in charge of the program, I do everything. And I don't usually ask for help from the teachers except for bring your class to the gym at this time. But my librarian really was pushing me and like, what can I do? How can I have kids integrate some poetry? And so she is taking small groups of students and they are writing like poetry where they go back and forth like I am a hurricane, I am a thunderstorm, I do this. So she's taking kids and they're creating their own poetry. And then I had a second grade teacher who was asking, well, we've been working on our poems and we're going to mount them and display them, why don't we do that in the hallways right outside the gym, and then the kids can take their parents for a little gallery walk of their poetry. And so this is becoming much more of a community thing than I am used to. And I don't know why I didn't do this sooner by saying, hey, yeah, let's include other teachers in bringing things to this concert so that it's a real, like, something kids can get really excited about and that we're all a part of. So that's been great. Why didn't I do this in all my years of teaching? Why didn't I reach out more? I don't know. So,
That's awesome.
yeah.
I love that.
Well, I should have had you go last because I'm going to go low.
Okay.
I mean, and it's one of those like lows that just feels low, and it's probably not as low as I feel like it is, but we are always harder on ourselves, right? So, I'm also working on a concert, but with mine is with fifth grade, and I talked about this on our last podcast episode about what we're doing with our fifth graders, and I'm doing a music program with them based on the book, What Do You Do with an Idea? And giving them each a song and then letting them lead the way. And guess what? Carrie's not good at that. Like I am a true, like I like to lead the way and I like to know where my kids are going and I love sequence and I love planning and I love all that. So giving over the reins to students has been a really difficult thing for me. And I've really dug in with 3 out of my 4 classes. My 4th class I'll have this upcoming week. And one of my classes is like they're just fine. Like they came up with some really great arrangements and they're feeling good. One of my classes went wants to go bananas and go way too far and add props and scenery and act out this whole thing. And I'm like, okay, now I've got to rein them in, which that I'd rather do than the other situation, which is my third class, which is they're just not into it. They're just meh. And I keep trying to like give them more things to try. I'm going to bring more instruments to them next time they come. They want to do a drum ensemble, so I need to gather more drums for them so they feel more excited than just a bunch of hand drums. Not that hand drums aren't great, but older kids love big drums and tubanos and things like that. So it'll be okay. It was just I felt like I was working real hard this week, and I don't I like it. Even though they were coming up with the ideas, I still felt like I was working really hard because I was having to navigate that. So all that to say, I'm learning and I'm growing, and that's a good thing, but it felt hard this week. And so I'm looking forward to it getting better and not feeling so hard in the future.
For our main theme today, we are including a conversation with Anne Mileski about some of the things that she has been focused on. And we're going to talk a lot about in-tune singing with all grade levels and all developmental levels. And so, Anne, thank you for being here. And we wanted to ask and start with what are some of the foundations and the foundational techniques that you use to help elementary students discover their voice and work on their ability to sing in tune?
Yeah. So, just to kind of lay the context here, the school that I'm teaching at this year, it's my first year here, and their music teacher experience prior to me was very, well, let me back up. So my classroom is very singing first focused, obviously, as a predominantly Kodai inspired teacher. And that was not the case for the person before me. So many of my students had never been asked to sing in their music class before I began there this year. So coming in and having pre-K through sixth grade students, who the sixth graders they were choir, so they were ready to sing. But having all of those students who were not only not used to singing, but resistant to singing was a really interesting experience, because in the past, when I've gone to a new school, it's been within a district or, kind of like what do you call that, a lateral move, where somebody's kind of had a similar teaching sequence to me. And so kind of starting fresh and having true older beginners and all of that good stuff was a brand new experience. And so the way that I thought about it was thinking about singing as that foundational skill that we need, along with steady beat and vocal exploration, right? The singing piece is that vocal exploration. Everybody needs a chance just to figure out what this singing thing is. Now, that sounds really silly because we all know what singing is, but you can think about what singing is, and then it's a very different thing to know what that feels like in your body. And so the easiest way to do that is what we do all the time, and just play. So the first piece is just experience, right? So if you want to get kids to start singing, you have to just start singing. And you have to find a way to get them to just start singing without them realizing that you're asking them to just start singing, right? So if we think about it in terms of like a traditional prepare, present, practice context, you have this preparation piece, which is all about exploration and experience. And so it's just doing lots and lots of songs, lots of singing games, lots of opportunities for you to kind of be the performer if your students don't have a lot of experience listening to someone sing or having a good vocal model, so that they can get an internal aural image of what that's going to look like and then what they're going to be asked to do. And then by asking them to join in singing when you're doing gameplay or whatever it might be, it doesn't feel like you're asking them to, like, okay, now it's your turn to sing. Now it's your turn to play the game and participate. So in terms of like really getting like granular back to what we do in the very, very beginning, it's just to, as I tell Kodai level ones, just sing the darn song and play the darn game. Like, that's all you have to do. Just get them singing and moving and playing. So that's like a great non-answer. Like, it's not very technical, but that's 100% my approach, even with my grown-ups, right? As I mentioned earlier. So
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, that's what it's all about, is trick them into, I mean, I say trick them into singing, but I mean, that's play. We're playing, and the song and the game, they're like best friends. They go together. So you have to sing if you're playing this game. So Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally see that. You had mentioned that your sixth graders were choir, and so
Mhm.
they're all good to go. Is there different techniques you might have used with older kids versus younger kids if they're not used to singing?
Yeah, so what I was doing, you mean in terms of the kiddos who were not in choir, like my fifth graders who
Yes,
maybe
yeah,
weren't used
like
to.
fifth, fourth.
Yeah, so I think that's just more of a, for me, that's more of a older beginner in general conversation and thinking about what repertoire I'm using that's going to get them compared to what I'm doing with like pre-K and kinder. Right. So, not that we're singing So Me all day long in pre-K and kinder, but when I'm trying to get them to sing, Seesaw or whatever it might be, like Starlight, Star Bright, that's not something I'm going to take to those upper grades. So, in terms of thinking about singing accuracy, again, if you want to get really specific and refined, finding pieces of repertoire that are exciting for kids that are older and games that are more fun, and then finding extractable patterns that you can isolate and maybe get a little bit more detailed with some like my turn, your turn echo exercises with mi re do or do la so or those types of things if we want to think about beginning to hear and sing those intervals accurately. So it's a repertoire decision.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then how do you know, especially coming into a new community, where your students are at when it comes to singing accuracy, in tune singing? You know, when we hear a whole class singing, we can kind of hear them as a group, right? And we know as a group where they are on the spectrum. But then how do you know each individual kid, whether or not they're singing tunefully? Do you have some strategies for that? And then also, a follow-up question to my question before you answer it, how do you work with students individually who are struggling? Do you work with students who are struggling?
Yeah, so staying with the main theme of everything's a game is I pull a solo singing game out of my hat. And again, it's one of those things where um they where I'm not saying, okay, it's your turn for me to assess you. It's just my turn to hear those kids. And sometimes it's as simple as having everybody sit in a circle and singing, oh my, everybody sings, oh my, no more pie. Now the microphone's in front of Carrie, so it's her turn. No more
Or
pie.
I
Yeah. And then going around. Now it's everybody's turn because the microphone's straight up in the air. Now it's your turn, Tanya. And sometimes I'm doing that, at least this past year in real time. I'm doing that to try to get like a litmus test isn't the right terminology, but just get a read of the room to see like how about what's my percentage here? Do I have like 40% who I just really need to work on what they're hearing and what they're actually producing? Or do I have just like one or two kids that just need a little bit of a boost? So if I'm doing that specific activity, for example, and I'm going around, I'm making note mentally of those kids who maybe I want to come back to. And then maybe at the end of class, writing down those names or just putting like a little star saying, I want to make sure that they have a turn again when I'm doing this popcorn style game. And the first time I go around the circle, if I have students who aren't singing on pitch, if it's the first time I've asked them to sing individually, I don't do anything. I just keep playing the game. The song doesn't stop. And I just make a note that that's what's going on. Then the next time, if I go to them and they're still not quite on pitch, so for example, no more pie, and they're just no more pie. Oh, listen again. No more pie. No more pie. Okay, that student needs a different scaffold. I'm still going around the circle, still not stopping the game. Maybe the next time I play the game, I get out a PVC pipe whisper phone thing, right? The ones you can get at Home Depot and that they use in, I think, the general classroom pretty often or in speech therapy and whatnot. And you have the students sing into the telephone that day so they can hear it. Or you have students cup their ears and get like big satellite dish ears so that they can hear themselves sing when they're singing that. That's like a huge fun discovery for any grade level if they've never done it before, right? But something so that they can really hear how they're singing. And then the last element is sometimes it just takes time, right? Sometimes it just takes, again, going back to that prepare, present, practice type idea. If we're giving them lots of experience and then we're showing them exactly what their singing voice sounds like, then they need to practice, practice, practice to make that match. Okay. That doesn't quite fit so neatly into the framework the same way we would normally think about it. But we just want lots and lots of experience, go back, remediate, all that kind of stuff. I remember I had a first grader, well, a kindergartner who all year long, I could not get her to sing on pitch, but she would always, always, always try. The first day of first grade, she came back and sang beautifully on pitch because she just needed that time. She just needed that extra time to sing and play and hear other people sing, to have her voice grow, for her body to grow, all of those different things. So, I don't stop talking. So I hope I answered the
Oh, good.
question somewhere.
No, and you were talking
So,
about strategies for kids to get their what they're hearing synced up with what they're producing. And I mean, as Kodai inspired teachers, we are all big proponents of, that connection between ear, mind, and voice.
mhm,
So tell us about other strategies you might have used for the ear training part for them to really, especially with the younger students,
mhm.
for them to really tune in to what they're hearing and matching that with their voice and what they're singing.
Yeah, I think the very first step is finding ways to do it even when you teach a song. So, one of the things that I do often, and we can have arguments about what makes a song tricky or not tricky, but if I'm teaching a song just like in the good old rote strategy, line it out phrase by phrase, by the time I get to the full song, there's often times that I'll say, okay, I'm going to sing this whole song again. And I want you to close your eyes and I want you to have your lips moving as if you were singing the song. And I want you to sing it in your brain before we sing it together. And so, even just like that tiny, however many second opportunity to have students think about what they're going to sing before they sing it, I think just builds that connection. So, I don't know if it's necessarily this one specific trick or this one specific thing that really works, but for me it's putting in the reps, right? Finding all of the different opportunities, like, oh, I could take 2 seconds here and just have us think through it, right? So that's sort of my approach to it.
Yes, thinking voice is something in kindergarten. Just when we came back from the break, it was like, okay, we've been talking about our calling voice, whisper voice, singing voice, and talking voice. Here's a
Hmm.
new voice, and here's our thinking voice. And we use Rocky Raccoon in his little
Yeah.
um, recycling can. And it's really interesting because I have played around in the past with like, how early should I introduce this thinking voice idea? When can they really get it? And I have tried before the break. And of course, each class is different.
Sure.
Students are different, but it seems like right this year, right now with kindergartners, this was really good timing because the majority of the kids I can tell are able to hear their voice in their head. And I do have a few though we have some young kindergartners who are like kind of a little bewildered about I don't think it's going on, in there.
Right.
Um, so, but that is such an important skill for them to be able to have is to hear themselves in their own voice doing the thing. So, yeah,
Hmm.
I totally agree. And there's
Yeah.
so many different, I love how you said putting in the reps. Yeah, we got to put in those reps. And for some kids, doing it this way is going to be more meaningful than doing it a different way, depending on where they're at. And um, developmentally, a lot of them will come back after kindergarten and they're just there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Carrie.
I
Sorry.
was going to say, I love the technique of the lip singing you were talking about too. That's
Hmm.
something I use a lot with older kids, my choir kids especially, because I have kids who want to jump in too soon and they think they know it and they don't know it yet. And then, once you get some of your really strong singers singing it incorrectly, well, they might be singing tunefully. It's just the wrong melody line or the wrong whatever. It's so hard to break them out of that. So I love that technique to make sure that they're hearing it enough times before they jump in and start singing it wrong. So I'm glad you mentioned that one too.
Yeah. And sometimes, this is a little bit more about rote teaching than maybe in tune singing, but they're related. Sometimes going from that 4x4 structure to the 8x8, then to the 16B, if you're just talking about a really basic song, going to that can feel like a huge jump. Again, imagine you're five, right? 5 or 6 or whatever. And so having just that opportunity to stop and hear it again as if it were your turn is a big deal. So we play aerial. That's what I call it. I was like, I'm a sea witch. I took away your voice, which it could maybe be traumatizing, but they get it back. They get it back. But yeah, I find that is helpful, and just finding again, just like those little slivers of an opportunity, even as simple as saying it's time to line up at the door. Goodbye, Carrie. Goodbye, Miss Mileski. So every time they come to music, they get the opportunity to sing on their own, right? And so that's just something that we do It's not like, oh, it's your turn. Oh, it's scary. It's just something that we do.
Yes.
Mhm.
If you grow them yourself, then by the time they're in those older grades, it's a lovely thing because they're like,
Yes.
we just do this. This is
Yeah.
what we do. We sing. Then you get a new student who comes in who looks around going,
Yes.
what is happening? And then they
Yeah.
join in.
And I have to say, I've been very pleasantly surprised this year because I have not had some, but part of it has to do with the fact that I teach at a private campus. But I have not had the participation issues that I would anticipate in different situations and that I've experienced in different situations. So whether or not it's just like the fear of getting in trouble or or not, but yeah, so I've been very lucky, but I have had that experience where kids have transferred in and they kind of like we just start by singing at the beginning of music class and they're like, "Wait, what?" And then by the end of it they're doing it too because that's just what we do in class, right?
Yeah.
I
So
do
yeah.
want to dig into that idea, though, of students who are really hesitant to sing. Have you had students in the past who just flat out refuse, whether it's a shy issue, a social emotional issue, a language issue? I've had that in
Mhm.
the past. Do you have any special techniques for kiddos who just are flat out refusing consistently?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to unpack there. So I remember specifically doing like one of those lateral moves when I was teaching in Plano, and I had a fifth grade class, and it was my Tuesday class at the end of the day, and I will never forget it as long as I live because they were that class, right? And it's just like I dreaded it. I hate to say that, but I dreaded it every week because it was a small class and this sounds horrible to say, but there was sort of a ringleader. There was one student who decided if they weren't going to do what they needed to do that day, nobody was going to do what they needed to do that day. And I found myself even having to plan separate lessons for those kids than what I was doing with the rest of my other fifth grade classes. And in particular, they just wouldn't sing. And again, I can't remember the details, so forgive me. But again, I think it's a little bit of what my friend Nick Rosette says is that your classroom is your laboratory and just continuously trying to figure out what's going to make them tick. And I think I do remember, I think what it finally was I got Incredibox out. It was like back when Incredibox was like kind of the hip new thing that those days are gone. But anyway, and I had them write, I teamed up with my PE teacher because she had them she had them in the palm of her hand. And so we teamed up together and they did a fruits and veggies wrap and then they had to like derive the rhythms and then like we eventually like moved it to the instruments, but I never really got them to sing in the way that I would have or I would hope to, as Carrie, or excuse me, as Tanya said, when you grow them yourselves, right? And so depending on the situation, that was a situation where I was the new teacher. I was in like my first couple of years of teaching. And so it was a very different situation than had I had them since like even third grade. Right. As far as a student with a language barrier, excuse me, or just like really, really, really heavy anxiety, I think finding ways to help them feel comfortable, and this is again kind of a non-answer, is first starting with like a relationship build, right? And figuring out what makes them feel comfortable, maybe how that student engages with music outside of your classroom, having them sing in small groups instead of individually, all of those types of things can be helpful because there's so many factors, right? There's so many factors.
I'm
Yeah.
so
And
glad you
it's,
mentioned starting with speech with kiddos, as with a
Yes.
class, a group who's hesitant. I've definitely had those classes, older classes especially, like you mentioned, and they're still active music making. So yeah, you might
Mm-hmm.
have to let the singing go for a little bit, but that's still, in my opinion, a lot better than just sticking them on a Chromebook and having them do Incredibox without actually physically doing active music making to go with it, right? So you incorporated something that they loved and got excited about, but incorporated active music making in a way that didn't feel threatening to them. So thank you for mentioning speech because that leads to singing as well, right?
Yeah. And speech and put into a genre that they were comfortable with. They thought it was kind of silly to do like a fruits and veggies rap, but I had a couple of students, like there was one boy who I'll never forget, and he got up and he was just like, yeah, girl, veggies are the best. Veggies are so cool. I love fruits and so does my girl." And he was just like going, 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 going. And we were just like, woo. the whole time. And it was and they got to perform for each other, and that class came alive, you know. And then they went on their merry way to middle school, and then I had fourth grade move up, and those were kids who were used to me, and so I did things a little bit differently. But that stretched me. You were talking about stretching yourself with the highs and lows. That stretched me trying to figure out, what am I going to do with these kids? And it was so much more meaningful for them to think about, okay, what's going to make them tick, which is what we should be doing all the time, even if they're buying into what we're doing, right? And it just felt really good. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, kudos to you for getting them on board, because the relationships, had you not built those relationships, it just was going to go nowhere. And
Hmm.
singing and even rapping, it's you're sharing this personal part of yourself.
Hmm.
So, you've got to build that community and build that relationship. Otherwise, they are just going to not want to do it, because we're asking
Yes.
them to really bare their souls.
Yeah.
Um, and when they're younger, they don't get that. They don't realize that this is play. This is what we're doing. But when they're
Hmm.
older, they really do understand me singing, me speaking and soloing and rapping. That's like a part of me. I'm not going to just share with anybody.
Absolutely. I mean, and there's research to back that up too, right?
Yeah.
Like all the research shows that not all the research, I shouldn't say that. Much of the research that I have seen has shown that as students, as their grade level increases, their self-efficacy belief for singing decreases. And that has to do with so much of the social pressures. And they're thinking like, how am I being evaluated? What is this person going to think? Oh, I don't sound like that person. I don't sound like I'm supposed to. And there's all this judgment that comes into play, as opposed to when they're in kindergarten, and it's just like, oh no, we're playing a game. Whose turn is it? Right? So who gets the puppet now?
Yeah.
So it's a totally different thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of all of the fun in the classroom, do you have specific songs, games, activities that you would
Mm.
like to give a shout out to?
So I love No More Pie. I sing it all the live on day with all the grade levels. I love Cuckoo, which is just a cuckoo, where are you? And a student has their eyes hidden at the front of the room, and you have a secret cuckoo bird, and they guess who it is. Those are two of my favorite kind of early elementary games. And then, other than that, I think finding ways of just a game on its own isn't enough of a distraction, if you will, for students to sing on their own. Finding something like a puppet, like an external object, so the puppet singing can kind of be a fun, silly thing to do to help distract students. I still have them sing in their true singing voices, in their music room singing voices, is what I say. And not silly voices, but finding a way, just any strategy that's going to keep them less focused, because you can't immediately, or excuse me, all the way erase the focus on that vulnerability. But anything that can kind of lend itself to that distraction, again, if you will, I think is helpful.
Yeah, I agree.
So now we are going to talk about ways to know better and do better. This is a segment where we talk about culturally responsive teaching, resources that can be helpful, literature choices, anything under that umbrella. And Anne has some thoughts to share in that realm today.
Oh, just briefly. Just briefly. So
That's great.
I recently, and this is not a new book by any means. I think the publication date is in 2020. But the First Steps in Global Music by Dr. Karen Howard, who I think you've had on the podcast, correct? And anything that she does, I greatly admire her work. And so she put this out with the First Steps folks, and I haven't really gotten a chance to dive into it. And I have to be honest that I am one of the I need to do better about doing songs in many different languages that aren't just English and Spanish. Since I am not, and this is not an excuse, but I don't have a great big like choral background, ironically enough. And so I get very worried about pronunciation and how I'm approaching all of those things, which does have something to do with the cultural context of it all, but is not like the meat of it, right, necessarily. So it's not a reason to shy away. But what I love about this text is at the beginning of each sort of section, she has written information and cultural context about each of the different locations that the folk songs are from. Right. And so that's a really meaningful piece that you don't get in every resource. And what I also love is that there's a pronunciation guide and it's right underneath the text as it's written in that native language. So it feels accessible to me. So it feels like something that I can pick up and insert into my lessons here this year. It's kind of my New Year's resolution in music teacher land to be more intentional about finding things to make sure that my students, who are in a very homogenous demographic, to have experiences outside of themselves so that they are good citizens and good people of the world, as it were. So,
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great book, and we'll link to it in the show notes so people can go and check it out for themselves.
So we'd like to thank Anne Mileski for sharing all of her thoughts on singing today. And it's been wonderful having this conversation with you, Anne, and good luck in all of your doctoral studies and your teaching.
yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you guys having me on. And I'll see you at Oak, yes?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
If people want to connect with you or see more about your work, where can they do that?
Probably the best place is my website. It's just annemileski.com. And then Victoria and I do have some more recent episodes of Teaching Music Tomorrow coming out shortly. So,
Ooh, love those.
Great
Yeah.
podcast. If you aren't
Yeah.
listening already, folks, Teaching Music Tomorrow, you guys give such great practical ideas. I've really loved listening
Oh,
to your conversations on that.
great.
Yes.
I'm so glad. That's the intention, right? Literally teach music tomorrow. So awesome. I'm glad to hear that.
Thanks, Anne.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
For our work smarter, not harder, Carrie's got something we're going to want to put into play, right?
I've just got a silly thing and file this under stuff you might already do, but it just happened to me recently. So I thought of it and went, oh, yeah, this is just like a nice little tip to remember. So Tanya and I, we are both big fans of electronic grade books. We both use the app iDocio, and I know a lot of people keep electronic grade books or whatever you want to call them, record books in any type of fashion. But I also recommend making sure you do have some sort of printout of either your class list or your seating chart, or perhaps both, keeping it in some sort of a like protective sleeve, and this is something that's really handy just to have, for sub days and all that anyways. But what happened to me the other day was I thought I had charged my iPad the night before, but I didn't. So I was literally in the middle of a in tune singing assessment with my first graders while we were doing Rain, Rain, Go Away. And I went to grab my iPad and I was like, oh, it's dead. Shoot. So I went, oh. So I literally just grabbed those seating charts off of my desk that I have just right there in a little cubby, got out one of those vis-a-vis markers. And this is how I used to take grades before the days of iDocio. And I just wrote down in vis-a-vis marker on their seating chart how they were doing with their in-tune singing, and then once my iPad was charged, I was able to transfer the grades. So my work smarter, not harder teaching tip is, even though tech is great, having a low-tech backup system is a good idea for a variety of reasons.
Definitely.
So now let's talk about things we're enjoying. We call this our coda section. And we sometimes talk about things for in the classroom, but oftentimes we talk about things out of the classroom because we try to have a life. Tanya, what would you like to talk about? What have you been enjoying lately?
Well, very recently, I took my husband to New York City for a milestone birthday celebration. He is an art teacher and loves art, and I love art as well. I love being in art museums, and I love taking deep dives into my favorite artists. And before we had children, we